In this part 3 of the series on power, I am investigating and discussing the role of eugenics and the thought that demography is destiny, and how that interplays with the idea of power. Now, how we think about power resides in individuals. So to some men and women, it becomes apparent that this residual effect is more or less borne out by sequential generations of breeding, and particular breeding of a particular type of people. We've historically had what you might call a warrior class in almost every society around the globe, particularly of the great cultures, say in China, India, Mesopotamia, in Mesoamerica, Aztecs, and then Egypt, and finally ancient Roman Greece, and now the Faustian culture. So in each of these occasions you have had such a high level warrior class that it became apparent the breeding and nature of progeny from that class was supposed to be hereditary in rule. And this is where we get this idea that the demographics, but also the eugenic style about breeding, becomes an important topic, either implicitly or explicitly. The way we can demonstrate this to be true, and then why it's of such importance, is maybe twofold. I think first of all it's important to discuss the eugenics around a positive and a negative force. So it's either eugenic or dysgenic. So the idea that cretinism or certain defects are not to be desired, and that sterilization was an option, was the negative effect of the eugenics or dysgenic discourse in the early 20th century. Unfortunate as it was centered mostly around staving off you would call disease and malformations. The direction was that if you are of ill temperament or deportment, in terms of being an alcoholic or a gambler, then you may be at risk. But then also, and this obviously reflects very chronic addiction problems and psychosomatic issues. You may have mania or hysteria in there as well, but then also affecting very obvious defects of the person, say like mental retardation or Down syndrome, things like this. So there was quite a lot of science at the time established on the options and the recommendations around sterilizing parts of the populace. Then when we think of positive eugenics, we think much more in terms of power. So we can kind of disregard negative eugenics in this discussion because it's only related to the health of a populace as a whole, whereas we're much more interested around the demography impact of power. The best way to do this is historically look perhaps at something like the British Isles, where you had such strong warrior races dispersed throughout the Isles. And so in Ireland you had many kingdoms, and this we're talking in the say 8th, 9th, 10th centuries here, many kingdoms in Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, from differing backgrounds with different ideas around cultures, but all of them with competing warrior classes. And that what determines the hegemony in this way was both the ability to organize, the understanding of a single kingdom versus many trifling and middling kingdoms, and then also who was able to identify themselves racially in the way that draws the power to them, and they were able to take control of the Isles. And this culminated obviously with William the Bastard taking over the British Isles in 1066. But if we understand that the Norwegians or the Norse people were able to demonstrate their power demographically here to control the entire British Isles, even though you had competing cultures in Ireland who were Gaelic, and the Picts in Scotland, and all these other Britannic tribes, they were subsumed into what is the now greater part of the United Kingdom, and now including Ireland obviously, which had its own demographic battle with the invading Vikings. So to understand the identities before you might call them religious bifurcation and disputes around Catholicism and Protestantism, is to say we can understand the eugenic and demographic importance and preeminence almost of why certain tribes are the dominators, and that looking throughout Europe, why are most ruling classes Germanic and Gothic? Why is it that of the Normans, and you take the Normans throughout Europe basically after becoming the leaders of northern France, why are they also able to go conquer and set up kingdoms in various other places? So this is the mindset and the philosophy around positive eugenics, particularly around warrior classes. Obviously, it became apparent in the post-Enlightenment era that intelligence was actually of equivalent importance, you might say, and that men of high IQ and women of high IQ should then actually be pairing together to make a genius race. And so you have almost a competing prospectus around whether there should be a cultivation of a warrior race or a thinker race, and how we encourage or discourage certain matchings and pairings. Now this sorted itself out almost naturally as well through the classes, and that you had a bourgeois moneyed class, and typically you'll find the merchant classes being more educated and centered around intellectual pursuits, versus upper classes, which was still, at least notionally, a warrior class, and then the peasant class, which was assumed to be the untouchables, but a layer of class where they're able to be sturdy workers and they had a peasant mindset. So to understand all of these things, I think, is very important context-wise, to then see how in the 20th century it transformed, and you get what you can see here, which is a lot of commentary, and I'll start with a quote from Davenport, who was a eugenicist. The eugenical standpoint is that of the agriculturalist who, while recognizing the value of culture, believes that permanent advance is to be made only by securing the best blood. Now this idea of blood is very important, and understanding the symbology of blood, but also what soil and how that interacts with blood and soil as a, you could almost call it a umbrella term for what we wanted to encourage and how we would motivate and to have a, you almost want to call it a ethos and like an anima that can sustain a populace like the Germanic Faustian mindset. And then you have the exact same concurrence on this topic from America, from the UK, Germany, Sweden, the Swiss, Italians. So the general scientific purview switched from health to a breeding type of health, and that there were certain genetic defects we could breed ourselves out of and away from, and that there was an encouragement toward certain attributes. And you can see here just some propaganda from the UK about only healthy seeds must be sown. So it is this very animalistic husbandry ideal that we can start taking humans as animals and understanding how a pairing and then a consequent bearing of children would enable society to grow in the ways we want it to, encouraging this positive eugenics. This, I'd say, had its acme in the Lebensborn program. So Himmler was a super fanatical backer of eugenics, and particularly positive eugenics towards certain ideals. Now his obviously were fairly intuitive, and that he would prefer the tall, the blonde, the blue-eyed, muscular, smart, handsome, athletic, brave. These are these essential traits of a Lebensborn, and why you would want SS officers and Norwegian women, for instance, to be pairing is because you wanted to breed more of these Viking warriors, or in his sense the Teutonic blood, to be profligate and to be prodigiously expanded. This is a harkening back, at least, I would say, from a typology, but also a systematic way that we consider knights and maidens to have paired, and that the knights and kings and the lords of old would have daughters, and they would then pair them off. And we understood that a knight was obviously a brave warrior who was able to triumph and utilize his superiority in this way to make a splendiferous pairing of a beautiful maiden and a brave, handsome, strong knight. The German Nazi program was much more engineered systematically here, though. So as to say, as long as the women and the men involved had what was heritage investigations done and to assure certain levels of purity, then the rest would take care of itself. And there was some 50,000 to 100,000 babies born out of this program. And I won't go into their fates, but it is to say that the idea was quite closely intertwined with the success of post-war Germany and what they had envisioned to be a new ruling class. Now, this is quite unfortunate, and the results of Germany losing means that the idea of eugenics lost and is shamed away from being talked about, even though we can see that the current social sorting and the social construction of who pairs with who is still very much centered around offering the best pairs. But, and this is where the big but comes in, is to say that the current fertility rate and the current women having children per woman is much lower. So the Nazis on one hand wanted to encourage and had medals for women having 4, 6, 8 children, 10 children, etc. Whereas today we're lucky, and a big family might be considered 3 children, and then one is actually normalized to the degree that having a single child is no longer this freak occurrence or a question around either sterility or infertility, but it's to say that it's actually the preferred, and we've analyzed whether or not we want children to such a degree that one feels right, rather than a natural expression of how many is just us being a good pairing and having progeny that reflects our love for each other. So the World War II side effects have actually impacted our ability to discuss and promote certain social objectives around, not necessarily breeding programs, but discussions around eugenics from a health or a, say, IQ and promoted features, because we're not allowed and can't discuss the promotion of features because it's seen quite dastardly and almost bigoted to think that someone's better than someone else, in a way that we want to encourage those people to be with each other in some way. It seems very tyrannical or despotic, but I think it's the opposite of draconian, if that makes sense, in that we previously had tried to utilize science in every realm of living, and now the ethical police are not allowing the public discourse even of certain topics because of its association to war criminals. So you don't get the intellectual honesty, and it's one thing to damn an idea or to damn the man who had the idea. I think to finalize here, I can read something about the Italian view on dysgenics, but also eugenics, and how World War I was impacting them directly in their thoughts. So Patalani here saying that the death of eugenics, which, when it was just born, offered portents of a bright path, with glimpses of grand benefits for humankind, is not the smallest damage done to science by war. The death of eugenics is the march of infamy that distinguishes our civilization, so atrociously offended in the early years of the 20th century. There will come a day, unfortunately still far off, in which our descendants pronounce a judgment on the events today and on the arrest of progress of eugenics. And so obviously you can see how prescient this is, in that he was able to foresee our own societies rejecting what was a noble idea, in that we want to promote health, and the health is the best of us, and that large growing countries where the best portion of the population are having children is actually a good thing and a celebrated thing, where we have now much more negative connotations around the word eugenics, as well as just any consideration on what would be breeding or matching programs, even though in a parallel alternate reality that we participate in, we have dating profiles and social media applications which are intended to match people, and that your ranking and your ELO score about how good you look and how famous or rich you are match you to people corresponding to your social level. So there is a huge irony around our disgust for the very ideas we're trying to live into. I think it's very disingenuous, and we're just being intellectually dishonest in that regard, that we're refusing to ignite discussions on ideas in the language that would be most useful, and instead we're going into and making products and a reality in which it's a almost negative but an ignorant reality, and we're trying to forget our past and stumbling and bumbling into a worse and ill-designed future. I think the best way to sum then is with the quote, is to say, in short, its victory by the sword must be consolidated by victory of the cradle. Racial value and moral and political virtues are the considerations of the day, and that if you are going to conquer and win, then you need to have a plan to establish that victory ad infinitum, or forever, and that's through, as they say, victory by the cradle.